One technique that ship captains use to determine how critical an issue might be is to ask this question: is the damage above the waterline or below the waterline? That's how they'll know how risky the issue is. Hey guys, Todd Dawalt here from ConstructionLeadingEdge.com, and we've got two parts to this episode. The first part, we're going to be talking about red teaming your business, why you want to, how to do it, a couple of tools you can use. And then in the second part, you'll hear an interview with a construction business leader who has made his business more resilient by putting some crucial systems in place. So let's jump into it. You may want to go over to YouTube and watch this. There's going to be some tools that we'll be talking about that will make more sense if you watch them on video. So you can search for Construction Leading Edge TV on YouTube and find episode 294. But let's jump into it. In the 1500s, there was an individual who introduced a pretty radical new position that was the origin of a term that a lot of us still use today. The individual, if you're watching the video, you'll see a picture of it, at least what the interwebs say this individual looked like. This was Pope Sixtus V, and he became responsible for determining who was worthy of sainthood in the Catholic Church back in the 1500s. And he created a position called Advocatus Diaboli. Advocatus Diaboli. Maybe if you know Latin, you can guess what that means, what that translates into English. That is the devil's advocate. If you've ever heard the term devil's advocate, and if you've been around a while, I'm pretty certain you have, but the devil's advocate was an official position within the Catholic Church whose job was to argue against the canonization, or basically argue against granting sainthood of a candidate in order to uncover any character flaws or misrepresentations of the evidence in favor of sainthood. So basically, the Pope came up with a position and said, all right, your job as the devil's advocate is to argue against, go find every reason why this person should not be a saint. And again, according to the internet, this role existed in the Catholic Church until into the 1980s. I read about in the movie World War Z, a zombie movie, apparently. Read this excerpt or this story about this movie, and that early in the movie, the hero, Brad Pitt, is sent to Israel by what's left of the U.S. government to go find out why Israel alone, among the nations of the world, had not succumbed to the zombie plague. And in this movie, the Mossad agent that Brad Pitt meets in the airport gives him the answer that he credits Israel's immunity to this zombie plague to something he called the 10th man doctrine. The 10th man doctrine, which he said has helped guide Israeli strategic thinking since the Yom Kippur War. Here's what he said. In the month before October 1973, we saw Arab troop movements, and we unanimously agreed that they did not pose a threat. Now, a month later, the Arab attack almost drove us into the sea. This is what the Israeli agent was saying. So, we decided to make a change, the Israeli explains. He said this: if 9 of us with the same information arrive at the exact same conclusion, it is the duty of the 10th man to disagree. No matter how improbable it may seem, the 10th man has to start thinking with the assumption that the other 9 were wrong. So in the military and in business, this is known as red teaming. Red teaming. The definition of red teaming is a systematic way of making critical and contrarian thinking part of the strategic planning process of any organization. Here's what red teaming does. It provides a robust set of tools designed to challenge assumptions, to expose hidden threats, and stress test plans and strategies. Let me say that again. Red teaming provides a robust set of tools designed to challenge assumptions, number one. Number two, expose hidden threats, And number 3, to stress test plans and strategies. Why should an organization use red teaming? Well, according to the U.S. Army Red Team Handbook, which is a real thing, here's why. Number 1, we routinely take shortcuts because of limitations on time, personnel, or other resources, and we accept that as a normal way of doing business. Think about that. Does that sound familiar? In your operation, do you take shortcuts because of limitations on time, people, staffing, or other resources, and then just accept that as a normal way of doing business? Around here, we call that doing just enough to start, the JETS, trap. Just enough to start. We don't have time to figure everything out, so let's do just enough to get the project started. Just enough to get a contract signed, just enough to get an estimate out the door, maybe just enough to hire someone, just enough to get a job description posted. So doing just enough to start, I'll tell you, in my experience, after doing this for over 25 years, that just enough to start mentality, the thinking trap, is the root cause of a lot of problems. That's a shortcut. So the second reason that we should red team, according to the U.S. Army Red Team Handbook, is we assume we understand situations because we've been in similar ones before, and we turn a blind eye to ambiguity, or we don't fully appreciate what they call asymmetries. This is very common with construction business owners. To start a business and run a business, you have to be able to absorb and deal with a certain amount of risk and ambiguity. And we assume we understand situations because we've been in similar ones before, and we turn a blind eye to that ambiguity. We assume we'll figure it out, sort of a cavalier cowboy attitude, which, quite frankly, according to an FMI Corp study that on why successful contractors fail, that attitude is one of the reasons successful contractors fail. Large contracting businesses fail, is this taking shortcuts, making assumptions, this cavalier cowboy attitude. The third reason why to red team is that we make many small decisions that are individually close enough, but when joined together become the seeds of failure. Number 4, we discount potential threats because we don't fully appreciate the likelihood of occurrence or the complexity of influencing factors. So we discount, this might happen, but it's probably not going to happen. Kind of goes back to that cavalier cowboy attitude. And then finally, we take comfort in the familiar and we assume that others, even on the other side of the world, share our views, our beliefs, our tendencies. So we assume the best about people. We assume customers will operate in good faith. We assume general contractors we're working for will pay, that they'll pay that T&M ticket. We assume that people we hire have the best of intentions and will never steal from us. They'll never commit fraud, right? So we take comfort in the familiar. We assume others share our views, they share our beliefs, and share our tendencies. We assume other people think and act like we do. These reasons and more are why we red team, according to the U.S. Army. So if you think about an organization that needs to be right, it's the military. Because if the military is wrong, if they have a, quote, failure, it's pretty catastrophic. They don't have minor failures. So let's talk about some red teaming tools. What can we do to red team our business, right? So we've talked about why. Let's get into some red teaming tools that you can actually use. So consider this analogy. You're a captain of a large cruise ship, and you are in charge of this entire ship. And you deal with all sorts of unexpected issues that come your way out on the water, everything from fires in the engine room, giant waves, enemy ships, in some cases submerged reefs. Inevitably, every ship suffers some kind of damage in its journeys. And one technique that ship captains use to determine how critical an issue might be is to ask this question: is the damage above the waterline or below the waterline? That's how they'll know how risky the issue is. If somebody says We have a hole in the side of the ship. The first question is the hole above the waterline or below the waterline? As you can imagine, a hole above the waterline is not great, it's bad, but not as urgent and critical as a hole below the waterline. So if something goes wrong above the waterline, say something happens to a winch or a toaster exploded in the cafeteria, things that don't put the ship at risk of sinking, then the captain knows it's not a critical issue. It's something that can be something that can wait to be dealt with, or maybe even something he can delegate to one of his subordinates, somebody on his team to correct. But if the issue is below the waterline, meaning there's an issue that threatens the seaworthiness or the ability of the boat to stay afloat and the life of the crew, then it's time to sound the all-hands-on-deck alert as a way to rally everyone toward fixing that issue or mitigating the risk, containing that issue as effectively as possible. Water's coming into the ship, and if it isn't stopped, you, as the captain of the boat, are heading to the bottom, which is what happened to the Titanic, right? If you've seen the movie The Titanic, they hit an iceberg, and the damage was below the waterline. And personally, that was pretty frustrating because this may be an unpopular opinion, but Rose basically murdered Jack. Okay, if you've watched the movie, you know at the end there was plenty of room on that piece of wood for both Rose and Jack. But my theory is Rose, she knew she had that diamond, and she did not want to share it, so she basically murdered Jack. So if you haven't seen the movie, spoiler alert, Jack dies in the end of Titanic. So you cannot convince me otherwise. Rose murdered Jack. But I digress. So let's think about how this analogy might be applied to your business. Okay? This above the waterline or below the waterline. This is one of the tools you can use to red team your operation and assess risk. So think of an issue facing your business and imagine the worst possible scenario, right? Everything goes wrong. In this horrible set of events, would you materially damage the business or worse, or go out of business? If a situation would lead you to go out of business, then this is a below the waterline issue and it needs to be resolved immediately. If it's not going to destroy the business, then it's an above the waterline issue. So let's dig into this a little bit more and use another tool to assess business risk, which is the 5x5 risk matrix. Okay, this is going to make more sense if you watch the video over on YouTube, but if you're listening to the podcast, you can imagine this. You have a 5x5 matrix, okay? 5 blocks by 5 blocks, and the x-axis or the horizontal axis is the severity of the problem. How bad is it? Goes from on the left side, negligible, minor, up to catastrophic. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 would be negligible, 2 would be minor, 3 would be moderate, 4 would be major, 5 would be catastrophic on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis, or the y-axis, is the likelihood. How likely is this to happen? So from the bottom, working your way up, 1 in likelihood is rare, 2 is unlikely, 3 is possible, it's possible, 4 is likely, 5 is almost certain. So in the bottom left corner, it's negligible severity and rare likelihood. Upper right corner is catastrophic and almost certain. So up and to the right is bad, down and to the left, not so bad, right? So another way to say it is up and to the right, top right corner, catastrophic, almost certain. That's an extinction level event. Extinction level event. So let's run through some examples, and I'll ask you to think about how you would assess these risks in your operation using this risk matrix. And if you sketch this out, or if you watch the video, you can see the numbers. Is it a 1, which is rare and negligible severity, or is it a 25 in the upper right-hand corner? So the first scenario is, what if you lose your cell phone? So first question is this above the waterline or below the waterline? Is this an extinction level event if you lose your cell phone? And then how would you rate this risk? How likely is it? And then how severe would the consequences be? For some of you, it's pretty likely. Maybe you lose 2 or 3 phones a year. For some of you, it could be a catastrophic event because you run your entire business on your cell phone. But how would you rate that using those 2 questions? Is it above or below the waterline? And number 2, how would you rate that risk? The next one is, what if your website goes down? What if your website goes down? Is that above the waterline or below the waterline? And then how would you rate that risk using the 5x5 risk matrix? Moving up the scale, what if a big project cancels 2 weeks before you were scheduled to start? A project that represents like 25 to 50% of your annual revenue. Would that be above the waterline or below? And then what's the risk rating on that? Here's one that happened a few years ago to you folks in Texas and the surrounding area. There's an ice storm that causes a power outage for 4 days, or in some cases, 2 weeks. Is that above or below the waterline? And then what's the risk rating? How would you rate that risk using the 5x5 matrix? Here's another one that happened to one of our clients a couple of years ago. Your superintendent goes into the hospital, goes into the ICU, and then passes away. He dies a week later. Is that above or below the waterline for your business? And what's the risk rating? How severe would the impact be? Would it have minor impact on your operations? Would it be catastrophic to your operations? This one happened to a company that I used to work for a couple of years after I left. There was some work being done on a really windy day on an old wood frame structure across the road from this location. That wood frame structure caught on fire. The wind blew it across the road, and the office of this company burned to the ground. What if your office burned to the ground? Would that be above the waterline or below the waterline? And how would you rate that risk? What would you do? Would that be catastrophic? How likely is that to happen? How would you rate that? What if you, as the owner or the leader, are in the hospital for 2 weeks? You're incapacitated to some degree. You're not able to take phone calls. You're not able to respond to emails. You're not able to work for 2 weeks. What would that do to your business? Would your team be able to operate without you? Would customers get frustrated and leave? Would the wheels just fall off? What would happen if you were incapacitated for 2 weeks? So the 5x5 risk matrix is a good tool you can use to assess what are the risks. What should you be looking at? That's where we're red teaming your business. You are taking a contrarian view, looking at what might go wrong, being the devil's advocate so that you can come up with plans. So here are a couple of questions. When is the best time to prepare for a catastrophe? When's the best time to prepare for an ice storm? During the ice storm or months before any ice storm happens? When's the best time to prepare for losing a key employee? When that person puts in their 2-week notice or months before that even happens? When's the best time to prepare your business in case something happens to you? Is it when something happens to you or months in advance? When's the best time to buy a life insurance policy or prepare a will? Long before you need it, right? And the next question is, whose job is it to prepare for these things? If you're the business owner, you should probably be raising your hand. It's your job to prepare for these things. You may not need to do all of these things if you have a team, but it's your job to make sure somebody is looking at these things, delegating these things, having these plans in place, making sure your team that your business is being red teamed, that somebody's looking at the potential risks and coming up with plans to prevent those risks or making plans to deal with those risks should they happen. So here's a different way of thinking about risk. A lot of people, a lot of small construction business owners think, well, I just need to get better at reacting to these things. I need to be quicker on my feet. I need to get better at playing whack-a-mole. But your job as a CEO is to make your company more resilient instead of getting better at reacting. Your job as a CEO is to make your company more resilient instead of getting better at reacting. That's your job as the CEO of the business. To recap, in a few minutes, just a minute, you're going to hear from John Hall, a construction business leader. But before we get into that, to recap, it's a good idea to red team your business to look for weaknesses. We talked about a couple of tools you can use to red team your business, the above the waterline or below the waterline test and the 5x5 risk matrix. So here's my challenge for you. Take some action on this. And if you're not sure what to do, what I would recommend is spend 30 minutes either with your team or by yourself and identify some of the biggest risks to your business. You may just take some of those that I walk through. What if you lose your cell phone, your website goes down, you lose a superintendent, you are incapacitated? Start brainstorming some of the biggest risks and then use the 5x5 risk matrix to assess the biggest risks and then make some plans. Make a plan to prevent the highest risk situation. Make a plan for one thing, but take some action on this. So take 30 minutes by yourself or with your team, brainstorm some risks, identify the biggest risk, and then make some plans to prevent that and mitigate that. One of the biggest risks that a lot of people are concerned about right now is a recession. Banks have been failing. Are we in a recession? What's going to happen to the market? Are we headed for another financial collapse, etc.? So if you would like to recession-proof your business, if you're concerned about a recession, like a lot of people are, and you would like to make your business more recession resilient, then I would encourage you to go check out our free webinar called Recession-Proof: How to Survive a Downturn and Thrive Afterward. You can watch that over at constructionleadingedge.com/recession. constructionleadingedge.com/recession. Watch that webinar. A lot of practical strategies you can take away from that. So speaking of making a company more resilient, up next is an interview with John Hall. And in this interview, this conversation between Leyah from our team and John, you'll hear some of the challenges that John and his team were dealing with from leading a growing business with a pretty large team, what some of that stress looked like for John, the, quote, glaring hole that John realized his team had. There were a couple of mindset changes that John has made around his role as the leader, what he and his team are doing to solve those issues, and how life is different now on the other side of that. You can also hear from a bunch of other construction business owners we've worked with who've had similar results over at constructionleadingedge.com/results. constructionleadingedge.com/results. So now let's jump into that conversation between Leyah from the Construction Leading Edge team and John Hall.
All right, John, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we kick off with all the questions, I would just appreciate it if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and your business.
Yeah, so I am the Vice President of Fire Sprinkler Service. We are a full-service fire protection subcontractor. We have roughly 40 employees, and annually are doing about $10 million a year. So still considered a small business, but growing exponentially from where we were a few years ago.
Awesome. Growth is always a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about some of the problems that you had that led you to find this program and to join the SYCB program.
Yeah. So I came across the SYCB program from a title to a webinar that Todd did. And it was called Working on Your Construction Business versus in It. So it piqued my interest because obviously that's something we all strive to do. So I sat through his webinar, and I called the owner of the company and some of my main guys, and I said it felt like he was talking directly to me. Everything he said. It feels like all the fires. It feels like anything important came to me and comes through me, and it's like you never have time to breathe. There's no vacations. There's the family time. You've always got the phone in your hand because there's always something somebody needs. And coming up, it was kind of was the Todd when I was coming up through project management and things like that, is always make yourself accessible. So that's what I always did. I was always made sure I was there. But Lord, the problems that came with it, no fun.
Yeah. Gosh, I can imagine. And tell me a little more about what that frustration felt like for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the stress just continues because, like I said, it does impact your entire life, not just your work life, right? So obviously when you can't, when you can't go to Disney World and not have to take a work phone call, it impacts your relationships with your family and everything else. So it was definitely difficult. The business is what it is. It's been like my baby for the last 7-8 years and has growing and is continuing to grow. And it's because of all that hard work, but I'm ready to spread it around and it just not be me.
Yeah. So it felt like you were probably always on, constantly having to answer your phone. I'm sure lots of sleepless nights, all of the things, right?
Exactly.
Oh, goodness. Well, tell us now, if you would, from those moments of before to now you're in the program. Was there a specific moment when you realized that the work that you were doing in this program and the things you were learning, that this is actually going to help?
There's so many tools that you all have provided, and the accountability chart was probably a big thing for me of assigning roles and just saying do it. Instead of me. I'm not the most patient person in the world, self-admittedly. So most of the time, if they wasn't done what I asked in 24 hours, I would just say I'm doing it myself, and instead. Creating that CEO schedule and making time to do the things that I need to do and just saying they'll get it done, and that was a big deal. Getting some of your own time back is a big thing.
Yeah. Just understanding who's supposed to do what, and then trusting and empowering your team to actually do it. That probably took a huge weight off of your shoulders.
Yeah. It's still a work in progress, but it's, it was definitely relaxing to know and to see the email where it did get done. Like I said, maybe not the time period that I would have done it, but it got done. So that's something, again, you just through the program you learn to process and as long as it gets done and it is done correctly, there's not much to complain about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so great. I'm happy to hear that things are moving in a much better direction for you and for your team. So you've now gone through the program. You've just wrapped up this 8 weeks. And of course, admittedly, there's more to be done, right? There's always more to be refined and to implement. But you now have a lot of tools and access to information that you probably didn't have before. I'm just curious, was there one particular thing or a couple of different things that you felt were most impactful or beneficial for you?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, the accountability chart was a big thing. For one, like I said, assigning roles where people know exactly what they're doing, and then, number two, it broke out a glaring gap that we have. Right, it's, we need a pre-construction manager, and it's a glaring hole. Now we haven't filled that role yet, but it's on our list now. It's a task item that we are actively hunting the right person, not just any person, which was another key component of the program, because you're not always just looking for anybody, you're looking for the right person. So, but yeah, I mean, the accountability chart was a big deal. Then later in the program, the leadership systems, they really kind of hit closer to home. And it, I think Todd has referenced in his very last session about, accountability is the secret sauce. It's hold yourself accountable, and it's be willing to hold your team accountable even through tough conversations. So don't let the little ones slip by. Have the tough conversation, face it then, and you're better off.
Right. Absolutely. And it's all really stemmed from the accountability chart, it sounds like.
Exactly.
A lot of awareness there. It's pretty cool how all of these different systems, there's 3 main parts of the program, but they all flow and work really well with one another, and they make sense the way that it's designed. So again, now I know there's still more that you want to implement, still more that you want to refine in your business, but take me back to before the program and some of that frustration you were feeling, and forward to now. How is life different for you?
Yeah, so it's different because even this week I've had to get out of the office early, 3 of the 4 days this week, and they were for pure personal reasons. My little girl, who's a softball player, broke her bat, and we needed to go get a new bat. Well, you know what? I had time to go do it. And it wasn't the end of the world. So big deal. Something that I would have been doing at midnight or at 6 a.m. Last year. Or in turn, I would have left and done it and had to come back and work till 2 a.m. that night, right, to make up for lost time. So it's nice to be able to have a little free time back. It's not always like that, but if you need to, it's nice to be able to do it.
Absolutely. That's great. To go from feeling like you have to have your phone tethered to you to that's a pretty big jump. That's really great.
Right.
Is there anything else that you want to share about the program, John?
No, I just a big thank you to you and Todd and Manish. Everybody's been great. We are definitely, as a company as a whole, thrilled that we've been through the program. Like you said, we still got plenty to implement. There's a lot of content in those 8 weeks, and probably impossible to implement 100% of it in those 8 weeks. But if you're looking at just getting into it, it's definitely worth the time and the hard work to do it, for sure. And we appreciate all of you guys
Very much. It was our pleasure. We enjoyed having you in the program as well, John. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.